Hello and welcome to the No One Asked You podcast. I'm reading The Wheel of Time for the first time and sharing the experience with you. This is One Good Turn, The Eye of the World, and today we are covering Chapter 21! Very good chapter. We get a NOAY POV, which I found to be very, very exciting. I know that we have more or less only seen her through Rand's POV, in which she is a person to be feared. By reputation, she is argumentative and combative, unless those two are counted as the same thing. Regardless, you see in this chapter really well that she also holds herself to an extremely high standard, and you see how much she cares about the Emmons Fielders and her responsibility as the wisdom. I like Nynaeve so much more now than I did before, and I was already kind of coming to like her before, particularly after that very sweet scene she had with Rand in a previous chapter. She has fallen asleep, or rather she is waking up after having been asleep from the previous night. She has her horse by the reins, essentially, so if the horse moves, it will jolt her awake. But one of the first things she does when she wakes up is chastise herself. "The light preserve you, woman. If you can't stay awake one night, you could have awakened in a Trolloc cookpot." Her mind sets to thinking about the Emmons Fielders and Moraine. She thinks they could be anywhere 10 miles upriver or down, if they're alive at all after last night. Angry with herself for thinking of the possibility, she slid back down into the hollow. Again, that's like one of the earliest moments of we're getting a glimpse into how much she cares about them. Mashadar had well and truly scared her, even more so than the battle leading up to Shadar Logoth and Winter Night. No, it's Mashadar that really, really freaked her out. She reflects on having bumped into some Trollocs the previous night, but apparently they had left her alone, and then Nynaeve comes to, I think, an important moment of acceptance. They know the smell of who they want, and it is not me. The Aes Sedai is right, it seems. The Shepherd of the Night swallow her up. She decides to go downriver. She knows it will get her to Whitebridge, to Caemlyn, and then Tarvalon if need be. So she's prepared to go all the way to protect the Emmons Fielders. And she reflects that she hasn't even had time to enjoy the scenery, essentially, because she has been so single-mindedly devoted to getting to the group. The prospect was almost enough to daunt her. Before this, she had been no further from Emmons Field than had the boys. Terran Ferry had seemed strange to her. Their lawn would have had her staring in wonder if she had not been so set on finding Egwene and the others. It's very important to note that her first thought there is of Egwene because of what we learn later in the chapter, which is her unique connection to Egwene above the others. Although I don't think that means to exclude the possibility of the others. But certainly Egwene first and foremost. But she allowed none of that to weaken her resolve. Sooner or later, she would find Egwene and the boys, or find a way to make the Aes Sedai answer for whatever had happened to them, one or the other, she vowed. So we do still get her adversarial nature, her extreme dislike of the Aes Sedai, but here it's filtered through how deeply she cares. Eventually, she manages to sneak up on Lan and Moraine, which excited me so much. I was so excited to hear what they had to say. Of course, Jordan cuts off, like, right at the important bit that we all want to know. But what we did get was wonderful. "They are all gone," Lan announced grimly. 4.5 men started south about 2 hours before dawn, as near as I can tell. They don't leave much trace behind, but the Trollocs have vanished. Even the corpses, and Trollocs are not known for carrying off their dead, unless they're hungry. Moraine responds, "One could always hope they had gone back into Shadar Logoth and been consumed by it, but that would be too much to wish for. There was no clear sign of the boys or any of the others. The tracks are too muddled to tell anything." And then we get a really wonderful line. "In her concealment, Nynaeve smiled. The warder's failure was a slight vindication of her own." There's a lot of character in that line, I think. "But this other is important, Moraine. I could accept Trollocs in the Two Rivers, even 100 Trollocs, but this? There must have been almost 1,000 in the hunt for us yesterday. They continue to talk about how concerning it is that an army of 1,000 could just pop up with no warning, without alerting any neighboring cities or nations or towns or that kind of thing. How were they sent? If 1,000 Trollocs can be brought so far south from the Blight, so quickly, unseen, not to mention being taken off the same way, can 10,000 be sent into the heart of Saldea, or Arafel, or Shinar? The borderlands could be overrun in a year. To which Moraine responds, the whole world will be overrun in 5 if we do not find those boys. The question worries me also, but I have no answers. So, it's Jordan knows we want to know why he's after the boys, but they will not give it to us, and I really wish that Nynaeve in all of this would have cottoned on to that specific comment and asked why. Anyway, Moraine continues. The questions worry me also, but I have no answers. The ways are closed, and there has not been an Aes Sedai powerful enough to travel since the time of madness. The ways and travel are capital letters, therefore probably spells. Unless one of the Forsaken is loose. The light send it is not so, yet or ever. The Forsaken together could move 1,000 Trollocs. Let us deal with the problems that face us here and now. Everything else must wait. The boys. Then we learn that Moraine has some manner of tracking them. We'll get to that in greater detail later, because I have thoughts and concerns about it. Concerns is a strong word, but, well, we'll get to it when we get to it. Anyway, Moraine says, I have not been idle while you were away. One is across the river and alive. As for the others, there was a faint trace downriver, but it faded away as I found it. The bond had been broken for hours before I began my search. Lan and Moraine wonder if the half-men are heading south. Moraine says at the prospect of the boys being dead, but I will not admit the possibility of them being dead. I cannot. I dare not. You know how much is at stake. I must have those young men. That Shaiol Ghul will hunt them, I expect. Opposition from within the White Tower, even from the Amelin seat, I accept. There are always Aes Sedai who will accept only one solution. But... And that's when she gets cut off, and it's so frustrating. But look, we really get an insight into how important she perceives the boys to be. We get a bit of setup that not all of the Aes Sedai will be of her ideology, and may in fact earnestly be adversarial to the boys. So I'm getting the sense that among the Aes Sedai, Moraine will be on the side of, well, the Aes Sedai at the end of the day, but in favor of doing good by the boys. If that makes sense. But she notices Nynaeve is watching them, and Lan is extremely embarrassed that he hadn't noticed her, and Nynaeve does a hell of a lot in this chapter, it seems, to earn Lan's respect, which is quite interesting. Nynaeve starts asking questions, not all the questions I would like her to ask, but several important questions. What have you meshed Egwene and the boys in? What filthy Aes Sedai plots are you planning to use them in? Although, admittedly, I'm surprised she hadn't asked that before. I had presumed she'd have asked that before. In which case, perhaps she could have said, no more deflections. Answers now, type of a thing. Anyway. Nynaeve insults Moraine, to which Moraine says, You have very little room to talk wisdom. You can wield the one power yourself, after a fashion. To which Nynaeve responds, Why don't you try claiming I am a Trolloc? And the meat of this chapter, insofar as Nynaeve is concerned, I think is coming to acceptance of this part of herself. And again, part of what I think makes Nynaeve so likable here is her angry pragmatism. She's gonna do the things that she has to do, but she's gonna be angry about it. Again, from her perspective, and knowing that it's like she's also this way with herself as well as others, I find to be likable. But immediately she does not want to be anything like the Aes Sedai, so she does not want to admit that she can touch the one power. Moraine says, Do you think I can stand face to face with a woman who can touch the true source and channel the one power? even if only now and then, without knowing what she is? Just as you sensed the potential in Egwin, how do you think I knew you were behind that tree? If I had not been distracted, I would have known the moment you came close. You certainly are not a Trolloc for me to feel the evil of the Dark One. So what did I sense, Nynaeve Almira, wisdom of Emond's Field, and unknowing wielder of the One Power? Nynaeve notes Lan looking down in a weird way. She also notes repeatedly throughout this chapter how his face never changes. He always has a very stoic expression, except for his eyes, which are very expressive, at least to her. Moraine says, I had my suspicions in Emond's Field even before I met you. People told me how upset the wisdom was that she had not predicted the hard winter and the lateness of spring. They told me how good she was at foretelling weather, at telling the crops. They told me how wonderful her cures were, how she sometimes healed injuries that should have been crippling so well there was barely a scar and not a limp or a twinge. And if you couldn't hear me running out of breath there, I will say I find it a bit aggravating how many run-on sentences Jordan puts in this book. Because it seems to me to be quite a lot. Basically, Moraine goes on to talk about how the only real complaint anyone had about the wisdom was that she's too young to bear the responsibilities of wisdom, which is a backhanded compliment. Wait, a backhanded insult? One of those two things leaning toward the positive. And Nynaeve is upset that Emond's Fielders would gossip about her to an outlander. Moraine explains what she's doing when she listens to the wind. It is of air and water. It is not something you needed to be taught. It was born into you, just as it was born into Egwin. But you have learned to handle it, which she still has to learn. 2 minutes after I came face to face with you, I knew. Do you remember how I suddenly asked you if you were the wisdom? Why, do you think? There was nothing to distinguish you from any other pretty young woman getting ready for festival. Even looking for a young wisdom, I expected someone half again your age. Nynaeve remembers that experience. Nynaeve fights back against this. You're just trying to trick me. It won't work. Nynaeve says she would know if she was accessing the One Power, and Moraine explains, Of course you do not know. Why should you even suspect? All of your life you have heard about listening to the wind. In any case, you would as soon announce to all of Emond's Field that you are a dark friend as admit to yourself, even in the deepest recesses of your mind, that you have anything to do with the One Power or the dreaded Aes Sedai. But I can tell you how it begins. And this stuff is exceptionally important. One, in that it grants insight into, well, how it begins for all. But in about 2 paragraphs, we'll get into it. Perhaps as much as 8 or 10 years ago, the age varies, but always comes young, there was something you wanted more than anything else in the world. Something you needed, and you got it. A branch suddenly falling where you could pull yourself out of a pond instead of drowning. A friend or a pet getting well when everyone thought they would die. You felt nothing special at the time, but a week or 10 days later you had your first reaction to touching the true source. Perhaps fever and chills that came on suddenly and put you to bed, then disappeared after only a few hours. And then here's where we get into the most important part, possibly. None of the reactions, and they vary, lasts more than a few hours. Headaches and numbness and exhilaration all mixed together, and you taking foolish chances or acting giddy. A spell of dizziness when you tripped and stumbled, whenever you tried to move, when you could not say a sentence without your tongue mangling half the words. There are others. Do you remember? Specifically, what I'm going to call out there is headaches and numbness and exhilaration all mixed together, and you taking foolish chances or acting giddy. That sounds an awful lot like when Rand was confronting the White Cloaks at Bear Lawn, when he showed off the heron-marked sword, and I remember that he was complaining about headaches, so it seems to me all but confirmed that what he was doing then was in fact accessing the One Power, or experiencing the symptoms of having at some point accessed the One Power. Which means we can trace back several days, because how long did it take for them to get to Bear Lawn? Presumably winter night then, or that or thereabout. Rand! Nynaeve wants to believe that Moraine had asked more questions around Emond's Field than she had initially thought, but Moraine continues, I will go further. You used the power to heal either Perrin or Egwin at some time. An affinity develops. You can sense the presence of someone you have healed. In Baerlon, you came straight to the Stag and Lion, though it was not the nearest inn to any gate by which you could have entered. Of the people from Emond's Field, only Perrin and Egwin were at the inn when you arrived. Was it Perrin or Egwin, or both? So it's interesting. For all the questions that I ask and suppositions that I make, it occurs to me I didn't stop to think and wonder specifically how Egwin managed to find the correct inn at Baerlon. But I'm glad that this is an answer that we got for it. Because I'm sure someone reading the book would have come to that question at that time. But Nynaeve explains, Egwin, she had breakbone fever. I was still apprenticed to Mistress Baron, and she set me to watch Egwin. I was young, and I didn't know the wisdom had everything well in hand. It's terrible to watch, breakbone fever. The child was soaked with sweat, groaning and twisting until I could not understand why I didn't hear her bones snapping. Mistress Baron had told me the fever would break in another day, 2 at the most, but I thought she was doing me a kindness. I thought Egwin was dying. I used to look after her sometimes when she was a toddler, when her mother was busy, and I started crying because I was going to have to watch her die. When Mistress Baron came back an hour later, the fever had broken. She was surprised, but she made over me more than Egwin. I always thought she believed I had given the child something and was too frightened to admit it. I always thought she was trying to comfort me, to make sure I knew I hadn't hurt Egwin. A week later, I fell on the floor in her sitting room, shaking and burning up by turns. She bundled me into bed, but by supper time it was gone. Again, it's another glimpse into how much she cares about these people, her community. And slowly Nynaeve is coming to the conclusion that what Moraine is telling her is more or less true. The Aes Sedai chose a good example. Light burn her, using the power like an Aes Sedai, a filthy dark friend, Aes Sedai. You were very lucky, Moraine said. Lucky? You have managed a crude control over the power, even if touching the true source still comes at random. If you had not, it would have killed you eventually, as it will, in all probability, kill Egwin if you manage to stop her from going to Tar Valon. And then Nynaeve has the good and logical response, which is, if I learned to control it, so can she. There is no need for her to go to Tar Valon and get mixed up in your intrigues. Moraine explains that essentially Nynaeve is not equipped to be able to help Egwin, that 3 and 4, essentially, who are born with the power, die, at most within 5 years, essentially. Nynaeve seems to have bucked the trend, and Egwin would most likely die. And that the death is pretty gruesome, lots of convulsing, lots of screaming. You're lying. All those questions you asked in Emond's Field. You found out about Egwin's fever breaking, about my fever and chills, all of it. You made all of this up. You know I did not. Nynaeve nodded. It had been a last stubborn effort to deny what was plain, and there was never any good in that, however unpleasant it might be. Amazing character, big C character there. Nynaeve is wonderful. Very fond of her right now. You have great potential, I think, Moraine continued. With training you might become even more powerful than Egwin, and I believe she can become one of the most powerful Aes Sedai we have seen in centuries. I don't let Egwin hear you saying that, because that will greatly frustrate her. Because she's got to be the best Aes Sedai ever, I bet. We get a really good line of this new acceptance. No, I'll have nothing to do with... And then she thinks, with what? Myself? I would ask you not to tell anyone about this, please. Moraine nods in assent. Then we touch upon, ever so slightly, we don't really get the why if I recall correctly. Nynaeve states, none of this explains what you want with Rand and Mat and Perrin. The Dark One wants them, Moraine responds. If the Dark One wants a thing, I oppose it. Can there be a simpler reason, or better? That's so aggravating, because this is like the second or third time we have heard that exact response, and I'm sorry, it's not good enough, and there's no reason why Nynaeve, right here, right now, couldn't say, that's not a good enough answer, why does he want them? I get you want to oppose the Dark One, but why does he want them? And I damn well bet that Moraine knows exactly why he wants them. Then we got a little bit of a confusing thing here. So Moraine's line is, Lan, we must be going. South, I think. I fear the wisdom will not be accompanying us. And I heard that, and I took that to not quite be a threat, but an expectation of some sort of an order, like telling her, you are not coming with us. Sort of a statement. But Nynaeve thinks to herself, she doesn't want me along. She's trying to put my back up so I'll go back home and leave them alone with her. And then she says, oh yes, I will be going with you. You cannot keep me from it. Now, whether or not that was actually what was going on in Moraine's mind is hard to say. But it took me a couple moments of going through this exchange and a little bit of what follows, because Lan says, no one will try to keep you from it. A part of the pattern? He says to Moraine, and Moraine responds, perhaps so. I should have spoken to Min again. And of course, then my mind goes to, but Rand did. But no, really, it's I was confused, I guess, more with trying to understand what was going on in Moraine's mind when she had said that Nynaeve wouldn't be going with them, whether or not that was a threat or just an expectation or even reverse psychology, because the words verbatim seemed so final to me, at least the way I had read them in my mind. Lan goes off to get the horse, and he's acting weird around Nynaeve. In fact, he almost, at one point in the chapter, he uses her name, and Nynaeve thinks, oh, he almost said Nynaeve Sedai or something. So I don't know what's going on with Lan. It'll be very curious to see a Lan POV. In fact, here's that passage. You see, Nynaeve, you are welcome to come. There was a hesitation in the way Lan said her name, a hint of an unspoken Sedai after it. Nynaeve bristled, taking it for mockery, and bristled too at the way they spoke of things in front of her, things she knew nothing about, without the courtesy of an explanation, but she would not give them the satisfaction of asking. More good character. Lan goes to get the horse. Nynaeve kind of hopes that he ends up returning empty-handed, which doesn't happen. And then Moraine and Nynaeve discuss the course of action. Nynaeve asks, why south? I heard you say one of the boys is across the river, and how do you know? I gave each of the boys a token. It created a bond of sorts between them and me. So long as they are alive and have those coins in their possession, I will be able to find them. Nynaeve wonders if the connection is similar as to that with her and Lan, but Moraine denies that. And obviously this is the called it. The coins were a tracking device. And interestingly, instead of being like super excited at the I called it, I found myself wondering if it was telegraphed too obviously. Or maybe it's just that each chapter I read, I'm going through the chapter a second time essentially to record these videos. I think everything that's happening is well executed. Definitely confident that I had never heard about the coin thing before. So that part of the book is all new to me. So essentially, I was just wondering if it was something that could have been perhaps a bit more subtle on Jordan's part. It's not like a big critique I have, oh, book ruined, I called the thing. And I'm sure that there are so many things that I am missing, but it was an interesting observation. Moraine essentially says that as long as Perrin, and they aren't sure it's Perrin, but we know it's Perrin, as long as Perrin has the coin, she can keep tabs on him, so it's more important that they go after the two who don't have the coins than the one that does, and the one with the coin is likely to make his way toward Whitebridge regardless, and at the end of the day, she needs to go after the greatest need first. Nynaeve worries that they've been killed, but Moraine shook her head slightly, denying the suggestion as if it were too trivial to be considered. And then Nynaeve asks about Egwene, and all that Moraine has to say to that is that she hopes she's safe. And Moraine explains that she could take the time to look for Egwene now, but the Dark One wants the boys, not her. And that grants her some small amount of protection, which it bothers Nynaeve to hear that because she knows it's true because of what she experienced the night before with the Trollocs that left her alone. Moraine does offer that she could be with the boys that they're going after. Regardless, Egwene is smart enough and capable enough to get by, certainly no less than any of the others. And Moraine says, "As much as I hope for Egwene's safety, Nynaeve, I fight against the Dark One, and for now that sets my path." So it does feel a little bit... It feels like in this series that the Aes Sedai get put in these lose-lose situations, and whichever one they pick, the people who are predisposed to dislike the Aes Sedai will not accept that they took the lesser of two evils route or the more dire of two options path, and just be upset at them for being in the situation at all. Nynaeve wanted to scream at her, blinking back tears. She turned her face so the Aes Sedai could not see. "Light, oh, wisdom is supposed to look after all of her people. Why do I have to choose like this?" More emphasis on Nynaeve's caring. And here Nynaeve is in one of those situations that I just mentioned, where she has to pick the most pragmatic path. She doesn't know the best pathway forward. And either way, the other pathway will suffer, most likely. Lan returns, and again, we've got some of that combativeness in Nynaeve. His eyes widened when he saw her face, and she turned her back on him to wipe tears from her cheeks. "How dare he mock my crying?" Which he didn't do. "Are you coming, Wisdom?" Moraine asked coolly. And then we get one last important protective thought. The Aes Sedai was so confident in her power and her plans, she thought, but if they did not find Egwene and the boys, all of them, alive and unharmed, not all of her power would protect her. Not all her power. "I can use it, woman. You told me so yourself. I can use it against you." Great reintroduction to Nynaeve. I'm glad we got this chapter. I think that's all I've got to say for now. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks, bye.